Thank you. This is a great crowd. I'm just curious. Raise your hand if you're from Kershaw County. Awesome. Okay, thank you. And then raise your hand if you're not from Kershaw. That should be, wow. Okay. Oh, wow. We just shamed the people in Kershaw County. Thank you. Y'all are good at it. I should have taken a picture of your hands. My name is Nancy Neal, and I'm the regent of our Hot Brook Hill chapter of the Daughters of the American Revolution. And I wrote a grant this summer to bring some speakers into our community for people from out of town to come listen to. And Rick is here for his second time, and we'll be back for a third time in April to talk about the Battle of Hog Brook Hill. With the grant money, I am writing some newsletters, one on the elementary school level, one on the middle school level, just on local history of Kershaw County, which I'm so glad y'all are interested in. But we need to educate our children, and we need to keep telling the stories of the ancestors that came before us and the sacrifices they made. So y'all are like-minded and appreciate that with me. That's why you're here today. So I appreciate so much you being here. I don't think anyone needs to be introduced to our speaker. Everybody knows Rick Wise. That's probably why you're here. But in case there's one person here who is not aware of how fabulous our speaker is, let me just tell you a little bit about him. He is a native of Johnsonville, South Carolina, and a graduate of the University of South Carolina with the BA in History, Master's in Secondary Education, and also a Master's in Military History. He served over 23 years in the United States Army Field Artillery and is a veteran of Desert Shield, Desert Storm, Operation Southern Watch, and Operation Iraqi Freedom. He was awarded the Bronze Star with Oak Leaf Cluster and the Meritorious Service Medal with Silver Oak Leaf Cluster. Rick pursues his love of military history through giving presentations and battlefield tours. He was managing editor of the Francis Marion papers and is on the Liberty Trail project team. He's the executive director and CEO of the South Carolina Battleground Preservation Trust. Rick and his lovely wife Paula live in Camden, South Carolina, and we are proud to call them ours. Please welcome Rick Wise.
Hang on a second, my wife's got to get a picture.
Put those hands back up and I'll get Nancy's picture. Seriously,
If you're from out of town, raise your hand.
Thank you.
Hey, I tell you what, thank you all very much for traveling to hear this thing. Okay, so I'm going to talk, I do presentations about Francis Marion very frequently. Talking about the Francis Marion papers, talking about the Bridges campaign, talking about other aspects of Marion's life. So what I wanted to do is to keep things a little bit mixed up here as far as not having to go over the same things all the time the same way. I went back to this presentation that I did, and it's going back to 2020, during COVID, and I did this presentation to an international group online. And so altogether there are, I believe, about 200 or 300 folks. And we were just going, and a lot of us talking about Revolutionary War topics that were near and dear to our heart. So that was pretty good to be able to do that. So what we're going to focus on here is I usually just jump into Marion as an adult, somewhere around 1759. Well, let's look at his childhood a little bit and give some background. And also we'll have time to talk about some specifics that we aren't able to get into. For instance, being able to talk about specifics like what took place at Fort Sullivan, which we're coming up on the 250th anniversary of that battle here in June. Now, we think he was born about 1732. How many of you folks have heard of a guy named Parson Mason Locke Weems? Some of you have. How many of you heard a story about George Washington chopped down a cherry tree, and when his father asked him about it, he said, "I cannot tell a lie." Okay? Welcome to Mason Locke Weems. That is not a true story. I hate to bust your bubble. Mason Lock Weems made it up. He romanticized it. Hey, and even though supposedly he threw a silver dollar across the Potomac River, and money went farther those days, they say. Okay, didn't happen. But Mason Lock Weems also took Peter Ory's memoir that he had sent him after the war. Peter Ory wanted to get it so it was in publishable form, and Weems romanticized it, and people took it as the gospel. So there are some things in there when we look at Weems you cannot trust at all. Yeah, the first thing up there that Marion when he was born was not much bigger than a lobster. Well, that is maybe true because Marion did start off life kind of rough. He did. Okay, and then as he grew into a boy, one of the things that he did is he got involved in outdoors life. Now, obviously, this was a time when slavery was in. That was a part of the thing. Marion's best buddy was also his manservant, Oscar Buddy Marion, and Buddy went with him everywhere. They had relatives all the way up into what is now Horry County. They had relatives down into Moncks Corner and Charleston area. And so they were back and forth through all these woods and swamps. The terrain was not like it is today. If you drive along I-26 or whatever going into Charleston, you see how can anybody be able to get through there with a horse and a bunch of men moving? That's because the terrain wasn't like that. It was mostly longleaf pine forest, and the undergrowth was not like it is now. You turn your hogs loose, you let your cows out in the summertime, and all that stuff was cut down. And the other thing is there were frequent forest fires caused by lightning strikes, and that cleaned out the underbrush. So Marion and Buddy learned how to negotiate all these game paths and trails, and he was to use that with great effect later on. So when you look at Francis Marion and his growing up in the low country of South Carolina, he was going to put the experiences he had into full effect as an adult. He also had that wanderlust that every kid has. He decided he was going to become a sailor. He had one voyage that he took. Went out, think that they got rammed by a whale. The ship went down, and there's a newspaper account that says that 3 men, a boy, and a dog were rescued. Okay? We think that was Francis Marion. This kind of fits the time frame. But guess what? He never had sea legs again because that was not what he was going to do. Now, I'm here to tell you, I've been on a naval ship before doing stuff, and I'm an Army guy. Hey, I will keep my feet on the ground. I'm good to go with that. Okay, so 1756 is the first time he appears on a militia roll. Now, when we look at the Revolutionary War, it is very common for people to say, you got a guy who was making teapots, or you got a guy who was a farmer, or you got a guy who was a merchant, and all of a sudden, war is coming around, and they grab their rifle off from above the fireplace, and they run out, and they get in line, and they start shooting. And that's the first time they had any knowledge of military action. Totally wrong. Back then, you, particularly here in the backcountry of South Carolina, you had to protect yourself against marauders. You had to protect yourself against Native American attacks. You had to protect yourself against any other type of thing that's thrown your way. You may not realize it, but Hernando de Soto came right through here and wreaked havoc on the Native American tribes. So you wanted to be able to defend yourself. And when you defended yourself, you had a militia. If you were from 16 to 60 years old, you were in the militia. It was mandated. Hey, you went to church and you took your gun with you. Might be a rifle, might be a fowling piece, might be a musket. And after church, you had lunch and you went out with all your buddies and you drilled. Now, granted, it was as much a social event as it was drilling, but these guys were learning how to operate in formation and how to be able to operate as a team in a combat situation. But they were being trained mostly on how to do that shoulder-to-shoulder thing and be British soldiers, because that was the policy, that was the standard that they were trying to achieve. Could they achieve it? Not with the amount of training they were getting, but none of these guys went into action without having some knowledge of what was going on. 1759, this little thing called the French and Indian War is going on. And Marion first signs up at 27 years old. And we're going to fight against the Cherokee. And if you can imagine, if you go up into the Clemson area, you've got these, the Cherokee towns and villages are there going on up into North Carolina. And when you look at that, Marion is going to be like all these other folks that have been called out to be able to serve. And he is actually serving as a captain of cavalry under his brother Gabriel at the time. However, this action here, hey, they went up, they were going to engage some folks, but smallpox, malaria kicked in, and so really they just negotiated a truce, declared victory, and came back on. So Marion got some training. They got that experience of going up there, but really no significant engagements. Okay, but one of the things that he did get in this was because they were considered state troops or provincials, they got trained by British officers. And Marion was learning some things about here. He was learning that the British officers, you got to understand that back then, soldiers in the British Army were more afraid of their officers and non-commissioned officers than they were of the enemy. For any infraction, you could be flogged. For any infraction, if your belt was not wide enough, you had to pay a fine. And these guys didn't get paid a whole bunch. So basically, you know, they were terrified. Marion was learning how these guys trained people. And basically, you had to follow the line. That if you disobeyed an order in any way, shape, or form, you paid the price for it. Then you throw in the militia. Militia has not much discipline. Hey, they're usually commanded by guys that they have elected themselves. So if your buddy over there, if you don't like what he's telling you to do, like guard duty, hey, well, you can elect somebody else. Okay, so is that a way to fight a war? No, but guess what? Militia were a part of it. And so here you go, the fickle nature of militia. Hey, if they didn't agree with what you were doing, if British officers tried to enforce discipline, these guys voted with their feet. They left. And so Marion's learning that those folks, you got to treat differently. You can instill some discipline, but it can't be that hard type discipline that the British were into. And then you come 1760. You got Archibald Montgomery comes in. Archibald Montgomery, he is going to be able to make things happen. Okay? He does make things happen. He goes up into the same areas that the first operation went into. They burn a few towns, but they get into this long, narrow defile as they're going up into the mountains, and they're ambushed by the Cherokee. And Marion had a lesson learned there. Hey, long rifle ambush tactics. Because these Native Americans are firing from 200 yards out and inflicting about 100 casualties on the British. Marion was not involved in that direct action, but he is witnessing what's going on, and ambush tactics work. Draw people into a place. You can use bait. A few warriors out there, they fire a rifle or two and go running back down this defile, and in hot pursuit you go in there, and guess what? You just ran right into the ambush, exactly what you wanted to. Marion used those same tactics in the Revolutionary War unbelievably well. It's the whole wave your hand and see what happens next. Okay. 1761, Marion does get involved in action during that. Colonel Hugh Grant is now sent. Two actions against the Cherokee have not gone very well. And now Marion is definitely with the federal troops. He is Lieutenant Marion. He is commanding light infantry. And as he is commanding light infantry, he is under Captain William Moultrie. Now I'm going to have the help of a young man here who's going to show you Francis Marion. Okay? Ladies and gentlemen, this is Francis Marion. He is approximately the same height and the same weight as Francis Marion at that time. You know, so when you think of Thomas Sumter, you kind of think of that high school quarterback. Okay, that's because he was tall. Okay, but you're doing great. Thank you for now go out and lead people. Okay, so size today matters a bunch. You can't be an NFL quarterback unless you're about 6'4", right? Okay? Leadership doesn't matter how big you are. Leadership comes from what is in here and what's in here. And Marion was excellent at that. And what he did find was that during this fight, once again, you got Mason Lock Weems says that Marion, as the leader of light infantry, led a 30-man detachment because the Cherokee were set up on either side of a little valley, and they sent Marion's men in there, and only 9 of them came out. The rest of them killed or wounded, and that Marion and his men drove them off that hill, and Marion was a hero. That sounds good, Breeswell, but it didn't happen. Okay, there were a bunch of guys that got killed, but Marion and his men were not involved in that action. As a matter of fact, the light infantry, I believe they had 2 guys wounded because they crossed the river and pushed those guys across the Cherokee from the other side of the river. Marion was involved in that with the light infantry. And oh, by the way, Marion and his men during this time had received some training from a couple of folks who were Rogers Rangers. Now, have you folks seen the series Turn, the Washington Spies? Okay, you got Robert Rogers in there. Don't know that was really Robert Rogers that we know, but I can tell you something about Robert Rogers and the Rangers, that we still use the Ranger Handbook in the United States Army. When I was at the 101st Airborne and other operations, hey, those 28 rules of ranging that he had. Common sense. Keep your weapons clean. Hey, if you go out on a patrol, you never come back the same way. That way you don't get ambushed. If you go out and you think you're being followed, circle back around on your own trail and ambush those folks who are after you. Okay? But rule number 1 is the most important one. Don't forget nothing. But no one writes about Marion participating in the thing that Mason Lock Weems says it does. But Moultrie described him active, brave, hardy soldier. Hey, he was in a small package, but he was tough. Believe it or not, he was sickly before going to sea and going through that. And when he came back, all of a sudden something kicked in, and all of a sudden he became a different guy. He was not sickly anymore. We think maybe he had asthma. But after that, for whatever reason, he's over. Henry Lawrence, who was there at the time, behaved bravely, all of our men, advanced up the hills and pushed with great intrepidity across the river. That was Marion's guy going across the river. So what's he learning from this? Hit and run style operations. That's what the Cherokee did. Hey, you fire, create a few casualties, disrupt the movement of the formation, and then you pull back and go away. Marion has learned that when you fight in that type of way, you're smoke. Hit and disappear. The enemy reaches out and they've got nothing to grab onto. And you can devastate a formation doing that stuff. Because people that use conventional tactics, they're exercising conventional tactics. I hate to tell you folks, Vietnam, same thing. Hit and run tactics. That's what the Viet Cong did. Mao Zedong in 1937 was doing guerrilla operations against the Japanese. And one of the things that he wrote was a treatise on the 18 rules of guerrilla warfare. If you read them 1 through 18, Francis Marion did every one of those intuitively, learning stuff that he learned in the Cherokee War and then applied later on. Here's the other thing. One of the military historians that wrote the foreword for this book, when it was translated into English, was that Mao Zedong must have been on the back of Francis Marion's horse. Because imagine, this guy intuitively did this stuff. He didn't go to West Point. He didn't read books on military arts and science. He learned on the fly and then applied it, particularly in insurgent warfare as a leader. Where do you get your supplies and all this stuff? So he is an amazing individual in many ways. Okay? Now, I believe it was historian Hugh Rankin said that Marion's life was like a piece of spicy meat in between two slices of stale bread. Okay? So we're kind of in one of the stale bread portions here. Hey, about 13 years, not much is going on. He's going to Belle Isle. Belle Isle, if you go over to Pineville, as a matter of fact, next week, the 27th, is the anniversary of Marion's death. And every year on the 27th, it doesn't matter what day it falls on, there's a commemoration ceremony for General Marion at his tomb. All you have to do is Google it and get the directions, it'll take you there. The ceremony is at 11 o'clock. As an aside, what we're also going to announce is the release of the 3rd volume of the Marion Papers. Okay, so the first 2 volumes are already out there. Over 600 letters. All 3 volumes will be over 900 pages. Because what we, myself and the other editors tried to do, and this is Dave Neelan, who was the guy who put together the manuscript, is not only show you the letters and what was going on, the footnotes explain what was going on with the letters, you know, who people were. Matter of fact, if you want to know who, you know, Peter Horry is, if he's mentioned in the letter, down below, you just click on the hyperlink and it'll take you to his bio, and you click on it and you go back to where you were. So we were in the process of adding more maps, pictures, and those sorts of things, because these things are digital. Oh yes, y'all like the price, absolutely free to everybody. That's your tax money at work. Okay, so take a look at the Marion Papers, the part where you explain battles and that sort of thing. I kind of do that. I kind of took that under. So I hope y'all enjoy it. Now, I did have at least one lady tell me that, well, it's kind of boring because he's talking about where he's going and where he's coming from and what happened, and, you know, I need ammunition and that sort of thing. Welcome to the United States Army. Pretty well devoted. When the winds of war started stirring up there, Marion is, you know, he's definitely leaning toward the patriot side. His family came to the United States because of religious persecution in France. They were French Huguenots, and they got kicked out by the Catholics. You know, they were given the option, either leave or pay the price. So they came to America. So when you have another king and under the auspices of telling you what to do, I don't think there was much of a decision factor that they had to make. So one of the things that Marion did in 1773, he purchased Pond Bluff. Pond Bluff is now under Lake Marion. I don't know that that's really befitting that it's under Lake Marion, but that's where it is. Okay, and he goes and he is elected. And now let's get the order right. 1774, things are beginning to shape up. Marion is in the first presidential Congress, and they're talking about being able to form three regiments. They're talking about it. 1775, April, before they heard about the shot fired, heard around the world at Lexington and Concord. Then 2 days after that date, before they knew, they had already called the Congress back to session. June 1775, they decided that they were going to execute that plan to do 3 regiments, 2 infantry regiments and a cavalry regiment. There were 20 captains elected for the regiments. Marion tied for 3rd place with the votes that were received for who would be captain. So he had a very good military reputation. Okay, now he's going to embrace military life because now he is a full-time soldier. Now we like to think of Francis Marion going through the swamps and doing all that kind of thing. He started out here as a regular soldier. These were called state troops at the time. But the state troops were paid by the state, uniformed by the state, equipped by the state, and their uniforms looked like that over there. Okay, so 2nd Regiment had liberty on it. 3rd Regiment, liberty or death. I think 1st Regiment had liberty or death as well. 1775, we had the 250th anniversary this past September, and we raised that blue flag with the crescent on it at Fort Johnson for the 250th anniversary of that. And oh, by the way, the flag that we raised, it did not have the crescent turned. It did not have liberty on the crescent. It did not have liberty on the flag. The crescent was like this, straight up. For clarification, it was not a gorget or a gorget. It was not. It was a symbol of heraldry, or as Nick Butler in Charleston would call it, heraldry. Okay? And you had a crescent, you had a decrescent, you had an increscent the other way. Anyways, it's a heraldic or a heraldic sign. It was a crescent, and it was actually a part of Governor Bull, the former governor, royal governor of South Carolina, part of his coat of arms. And when they went to the French and Indian War, they had those crescents on their helmets and hats. Okay, so a little history lesson there on that. Okay, so they captured Fort Johnson. Actually, the order is given to Colonel Moultrie, hey, send 150 men over to capture Fort Johnson. So they go over, they get on the tide, and they go across from Charleston over to James Island, and then they meet militia there, and the militia are going to take them in. And so they go in, and they get to the fort, and they get ready to attack. By the way, Marion and his men were delayed in getting across, so they weren't quite there when that happened. And they're rushing up to the gate, and there are 3 guys there. Hey guys, we opened it up. We knocked all the guns down, so you can't use them right now. But here you go. Have at it. So without firing a shot, they captured Fort Johnson. Now, if you look at Dale Watson works with us with Liberty Trail doing illustrations, and we have the illustration of Fort Johnson. And you will see that they're raising that flag at Fort Johnson. And in the background, you will see that they're trying to remount the guns up on the wall. And in the background, you can see Charleston, the skyline of Charleston with St. Michael's and those sort of things you'll recognize. Okay, and if you ever ask, how does that happen? Well, what happens is we come up with a concept like that, and Dale and I talk, and I give him some of the historical background to it. He does a line drawing, and I'm like, no, it's not this, it's that. And he comes back, and like, for instance, it'll have, you know, a couple of guys are holding their hats like this as the flag goes up, and another guy's like got his up in the air. So you get them all in the same deal. Anyway, you do that sort of thing until you get what it kind of looked like. We're trying to go for historical accuracy. There's so many times you look at an artist's rendition, it's nowhere close. The flag's wrong, that's wrong, this is wrong. We're trying to fix that. As a matter of fact, another aside, we're doing Hammond's Old Store that's up near Clinton. And it was a battle before Cowpens. And in talking with Dale, I think you'll like this one because William Washington's cavalry charged into the militia. And when they charged into the militia and hit it, Dale had a guy going down like this. I'm like, turn him around. And when we turned him around, you got the horse hitting the guy. His foot's up in the air. His hat's going one way. His musket's going back. His shoe is flying off. And his toe is sticking through the sock. Okay, so as realistic as we can. Okay, but anyway, I think y'all like some of Dale's stuff. Dale Watson. Okay, so part of the problem they're having here is you got the monotony of Army life. I'm going to tell you, if you don't have an enemy to fight and you don't have a good training plan and that sort of thing, how many of you folks have been soldiers before? Okay, you guys have been soldiers before? Hey, if you got boredom on your hands, you got discipline problems on your hands. Because I have not met a soldier yet that would not fill his boredom with beer, wine, or something else. Okay, so you try to keep them busy and that sort of thing. And you had all kinds of things going on. We have the benefit of having the 2nd South Carolina's orderly book. Marion goes from being a captain to being a major. And he is really the disciplinarian in the regiment. And you will see all these guys in the court martials that are taking place for guys that are drunk on duty, sleeping on guard duty, all these other things. They also start learning how to do fortifications. And in March 1776, the 2nd Regiment is given the order to go and complete the building of a palmetto log fort in Fort Sullivan on Sullivan's Island to protect the mouth of the harbor. And with that comes some leadership challenges. Okay, so Marion is going to prepare his troops to do this. But it also shows that he is more than just an officer who is given commands. He also has foresight. Now, where's Moultrie in all this? Moultrie was actually kind of a laid-back guy. You know, he was a good guy to talk to other folks and that sort of thing, but when it came to discipline and pushing folks like Marion were the guys who were doing it. And Marion did an outstanding job. And part of as you go through the Marion letters and look at some things, well, how were these guys able to go and man these artillery pieces fighting against a naval force? Well, one of them was where in the orderly book, Marion is ordering his infantry officers to be at this location at this time to receive artillery training from men in the 4th Regiment that was the artillery regiment. So he was training these guys how to service the pieces, how to aim, moreover, how to hit your target. That was kind of important. Okay, so there are all kinds of problems getting this fort built. Finally, when it's realized that the British are going to come and try to influence actions around Charleston, the second in command of the Continental Army, General Charles Lee, former British officer who is now a American patriot, is sent down. And he looks at the fortifications and he says, you know, this is terrible. You need to abandon the fort. Governor Rutledge, at that time, believe it or not, in 1776, in March 1776, we established a state constitution, and our leader was a president. He was President Rutledge at the time, and President Rutledge is talking to Charles Lee, and he says, no, we're leaving that fort right there. We can hold it. And everybody that looked at it thought that that little fort was hopeless. It was about, according to Peter O'Reilly, it was about 200 feet wide. Okay? 200 feet, close to 70 yards wide. There were 2 palmetto log walls built to make the outside walls. Various accounts. Some accounts say that it was 10 feet tall, and then they had another 10 foot of built up, so that the embrasures for the cannons were in between these. But they did have 2-inch pine planks that they had the cannons set on. So you had a lower level, and then the area where the guns were, and then you had an area above that too for fortification and protection. Those palmetto logs were drafted across the harbor to get to them. And they were steadily putting these together. They notched them out, they put them together, they bolted them together, where you had your 2 walls, an inner wall and an outer wall, 16 feet wide. And that 16-foot wide portion was filled with sand and marsh grass. So now you have a very solid fortification, but most folks looked at this, and when you think of hardwoods, if you think of a ship that's made out of oak and a cannonball hits it, what happens? Splinters. Okay, most sailors were killed by splinters rather than getting hit by cannonballs. This fort was different. It was being built with spongy palmetto trees, palmetto logs. And that was to make a difference. Bottom line, General Lee did not get his wish. But I'll also tell you, he kept pushing Moultrie, complete this thing. You got to build up your flanks of your fort. They're not completed yet. If they get on either flank of your fort, the wall's only 7 feet high on either side of it. You're going to have to do something. And he pushed, and he pushed, and he pushed. And Moultrie was like, yeah, we'll get to it. We'll get to it. And he never did. Days went by, and no improvements were made. Here's a little known story. The morning of the 28th of June, 1776, a message is sent to a commander of North Carolina Continentals asking him to come and see General Lee. And General Lee is going to give him the command to relieve Moultrie of his command at Fort Sullivan. And he is almost at Lee's headquarters when they look out and they see the British ships have hoisted their topsails and are moving. And shortly thereafter, about 11 o'clock, the first cannon goes off. And this guy had turned around and was going back to his unit. And Moultrie is now in command at Fort Sullivan for the biggest event that's taken place in a long, long time. Admiral Sir Peter Parker, no relation to Spider-Man. He's got 9 warships. 2 of them are 50-gun men of war. Okay, he's got 270 guns. Don't get too excited about this, because when you go up, and they went up about 400 or 500 yards off from where the fort was, and what they did is they dropped an anchor and let the ship swing around till it was broadside, and then they dropped what was called a spring line. And that was to hold them in place so that you're holding broadside. You got 270 guns, but you only got half of them can aim at the fort. So they took, the Bristol was the flagship with Sir Peter Parker, 50 guns. You had another ship over here to engage the part of the fort that is a little bit lower down. Then you had the Experiment. The Experiment was 50 guns. And then you had several other guns that were 28, and that sort of thing. And altogether 9 guns. 3 of them were in the second line, with the intent that once you engage the fort, these 3 were going to go around to the flank that I told you about that's got the low wall, so they could shoot enfilade, otherwise shoot down the fences and be able to hit them in the flank. That was the intent. And so they start this engagement. And when they do, one of the problems that Moultrie has, they do supposedly have 10,000 pounds of gunpowder. However, most of the gunpowder they have is not in the fort. So the other thing is cannonballs. You got a limited number of cannonballs. But now you're involved in this fight. And the first broadside for these ships, actually the first shots that were fired was from a ship called the Thunder. It was called a mortar ship. It sat about 1.5 miles off, and it was lobbing mortar shells up. A little bit too far for the range of this thing that was have an effect later on, because the first round that they shoot falls short. The second round they shoot is short. So they have to keep increasing the charge to be able to get the range of the fort. They do that, and the first round that achieves the fort lands right in the middle. Right in the middle of where there's a swampy morass, and it goes in, sinks, and does not blow up. Later on, the Thunder's taken out of action. Why? because she was so far out and she's having to increase the powder to get the range, she broke the beams that supported the mortar and took herself out of action. So while all this is going on, everybody's having maximum excitement. Trust me. Okay, they're getting broadsides, and instead of these logs splintering, it's like they're absorbing these cannon rounds, or it's like they're bouncing off. One of the things about artillery at this point is these guys are now artillerymen, but they're not super trained artillerymen that have fired a lot of rounds. So they're having to take their time. They're having to be slow and deliberate. And across, oh, by the way, Francis Marion, you were commanding the left wing of the fort. There are only we got 31 guns. You had 31 guns in the fort. Oh, by the way, some of them are in the back of the fort and won't be able to engage. There were only about 20 guns that could actually engage the fleet at this time. What are your odds if you're thinking of this and you look at it on paper? What are the odds of you coming out of this thing in any kind of shape at all? Oh, by the way, I haven't even talked about that Sir Henry Clinton, with over 2,000 troops, was over on what is now the Isle of Palms, and they're going to cross Breach Inlet and be able to attack where the 3rd Regiment is under a guy named Colonel Danger Thompson. With a name like Danger, he's got to be good. So Danger Thompson and his guys are there. But how many of you folks have crossed between Sullivan's Island, across that little inlet, and to go over on the Isle of Palms? Yeah, a few of you have. Okay, not very far, is it? Until you go back to 1776. It was a mile between those two places. And the British initially thought they could just go and walk across. They couldn't, because they thought it would be knee deep at low tide. It was 7 feet deep at low tide, right there where the breach was. But anyways, so those guys were never able to get across. It was too dangerous for them. So the main fight is going to be with these ships. So Marion commanded 3, 5, I believe it was 11 guns. Okay? 9 to 26 pounders. The whole fort, only about 435 men. So they were going to fire 4 gun volleys. Boom, boom, boom. Reload. Aim. Make sure you're right. Fire. Boom. Okay, so you're doing this, and it is slow and steady fire. Now, you can imagine everybody in Charleston is up on every church steeple and everywhere trying to look and see what's going on. All they're seeing is just gun smoke, and they're trying to discern between the fire coming from the ships and the fire that's coming from the fort. And the fire from the fort is so slow, they're concerned that, all the crews have been killed or something else is going on. And it's the ammo constraints. Okay, well, late in the battle, the flag gets shot down. It falls in front of the fort. Sergeant William Jasper jumps down, still under fire from the cannon, polices up the colors, because when your colors go down, that's a sign of capitulation. The British were hoping that they had surrendered. Instead, Jasper gets the flag and goes back up, and he uses a rattler staff, and he helps secure it again so the colors are showing. The people in Charleston saw the same thing, and when they saw the colors go back up, they cheered. Okay, even though it was a hard, people say that. I don't know how they saw through all this gun smoke that's hanging out there. But late in the fight, and I don't know, I think I didn't put this on here. Moultrie is desperate for gunpowder. He's got rounds, but he needs gunpowder. President Rutledge sends him 500 pounds of gunpowder. And he says words to the effect, use your guns sparingly. He also says something that, to an artilleryman's heart, you totally understand. He says, P.S., cool and do mischief. Okay, now, there's at least, I believe, the Marion's orderly book has the title on it, says, be cool and do mischief, but actually it was cool and do mischief. Why? If you cool the tube of your artillery, it improved the accuracy. Okay, and how accurate were these guys? Marion's men against the HMS Bristol, Peter Parker's flagship, it was shot through by at least 70 rounds of artillery fire at close to 500 yards. At one time, they were able to cut the spring line, and when it did, the ship went around with its stern towards the fort. You ever heard that thing from stem to stern? It refers to being able to engage a naval vessel and be able to hit it in the front or the rear, particularly from the rear, and go all the way through. Because it's not going through side to side, it's going the length of the ship and doing damage. If you look down here, there were 200 plus casualties. Over 70 men on the Bristol were casualties, to include Admiral Sir Peter Parker. Everybody, it was said, that was up on the main deck got driven below decks, with the exception of Admiral Parker, who refused to go down because of the gunfire. He had a cannon round go through and take the seat off his pants and left him bare-butted right there on the deck. As a matter of fact, a British newspaper published that. And he was injured in the knees and back of his leg by splinters. Okay, so a lot of things happening there. And Patriot casualties, hey, 12 killed, 25 wounded. Okay, so what was the total result of that? The British left, and they weren't going to come back to the South until late 1778. So there was a long period in between. Oh, by the way, after the battle, when everybody was tallying things up, the Palmetto Fort used about 4,700 pounds of gunpowder. The British fleet, believe it or not, 34,000 pounds. And 7,000 British cannonballs were recovered around the fort. And that little fort held. So now, December 1776, things have changed. The guy who was about to be relieved command is now General Moultrie. The second in command, Isaac Hugie, he is going to do great things. Okay? The third in command, Major Marion, is now made a Lieutenant Colonel Commandant. Okay? So, Lieutenant Colonel Commandant, the reason they call it that title, he was technically a Lieutenant Colonel, but he was supposed to be a full colonel by the rank he was given. And why was that? Because the British did not have their regiments commanded by full colonels. And so if you were the exchange prisoners, you had to have equal rank. So that's why he was Lieutenant Colonel Commandant. His next promotion should have been Brigadier General. But Continental Congress lost all that stuff, and it didn't happen that way. Okay? So, monotony is the enemy. Once again, you're back into this, hey, a lot of disciplinary problems and that sort of thing. Marion is trying to enforce things like haircuts. You need to shave every 3 days. You know, they banned people who were separately selling alcohol in the camp. Chastises officers for not being sufficiently attentive to their men. Why? Because leaders are supposed to lead. You're not just supposed to sit there and hang out. And then the British changed everything. The last major engagement in the Revolutionary War in the North was at Monmouth Courthouse in June 1778. After that, Clinton goes into New York. Washington is outside of New York. Washington can't get in. Clinton can't get out. Neither one of them has sufficient numbers to be able to create a decisive engagement. And as a result, what is going to take place is they're going to develop through Lord George Germain and the other officers the British Southern Strategy. And the British Southern Strategy is to come down here, establish a base of operations, Savannah, take Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, separate them from the other colonies. And oh, by the way, if you do that, what's going to happen is there's possibility for a negotiated peace. And that negotiated peace, part of that would be that you hold on to whatever you have. And if you got those 4 rich southern colonies, that's good enough for the British. They're in a world war. They need to be able to cut bait and be able to just go and do something else. That was the plan. So, Francis Marion is going to play a key role in the British not being able to accomplish that strategy. They do come down December 1778, and Savannah is captured. Pretty good stuff. Then, the defense of Charleston in 1779. Okay, Marion is with Moultrie. They're up around Curriesburg, which is just on the other side of Savannah River, not too far away from Savannah. General Lincoln, who was commanding the Southern Army, takes most of his forces to go to Augusta. He's thinking that he's going to be able to force people back in from Augusta into Savannah and maybe invest Savannah that way with Moultrie on the other side of the river, kind of hold them in place. Instead, General Prevost, who was a very, very good general, sees the opportunity and crosses the Savannah and starts pushing to see how far he can go. You've got Moultrie now in front of him, outnumbered, is slowly falling back. Okay, he falls back to a place called Tullafinney Hill, and right in front of Tullafinney Hill is the Coosawhatchee, excuse me. Okay, and you've got a forward force there. And the reason I'm telling you this, you guys ever heard of a guy named Colonel John Lawrence? Aide to General Washington, protege of Hamilton and Lafayette? Well, he sends, you got about 150 men forward trying to keep the British in check, kind of as a forward alert, you know, that if they're coming to engage them so everybody can either respond or retreat. Well, they determined that their flanks are going to be protected because the creek is so low at that point that they can be forded. So Moultrie's going to have to fall back. So he sends John Lawrence with 200 men and says, John, go and get our advance guys, bring them back, and we're going to retreat. Lawrence goes forward and says, okay, we got 350 men. Can't be more than about 2,500 over there. Let's cross the river and attack. Okay, he gets the immediate response he doesn't want, which is the British fire at him. Lawrence is wounded. He tells the captain who was there to begin with, Captain, I've got to get out of here, but continue the attack. Okay, captain says, Roger, sir, and as soon as he's across the river, they fall back and do a retreat like they should have done to begin with. Okay, but that was the first example of John Lawrence not exactly showing great tactical acumen. Oh, let's go back here again. How many of you folks knew that the British went to Charleston twice after 1776? See, most people don't know that. Prevost marches and keeps pushing Moultrie all the way back into Charleston. And when he gets to Charleston, they're trying to quickly set up a defense. You've got the Hornwork there, which is like a medieval fortification. It's kind of looks like this. The gate that you see where my thumbs are here goes right through King Street, going to where Marion Square is now. And you had 2 half bastions up here. And later on, during the siege of Charleston in 1780, they had 18 cannon mounted on it. That was your main fortification, but now they're trying to hastily dig redoubts and trenches and that sort of thing to keep the British from getting in. And when they do this, one of the things that happens is they're trying to figure out what's going to happen. And now he's Governor Rutledge. Governor Rutledge determines that we're outnumbered. These folks will come in and capture the city and bad things will happen. So let's see what their terms are. Moultrie says, hey, we can defend this thing. He's got about 2,000. I think that with militia, I've got about 2,000. We're good. No, you need to send something forward. Moultrie won't do it. So finally, Rutledge gets a guy to go forward to ask what the terms are. The terms are you will surrender, everyone, including the government. You'll be prisoners of war. And if you don't, we'll go in and we'll raise the city. Okay. Again, not a good thing. Rutledge is not happy with that. And so he said, let's go and see if they will accept other terms. So he sends a messenger that says, what if South Carolina will be neutral? That you won't damage the city. You know, we're neutral here to include the troops that are here. And that what will happen is at the end of, and oh, by the way, the port will stay open. And oh, by the way, after the war, whoever wins, that's the side we'll be on. And thank the good Lord, General Prevost said, that is a political and not a military decision. The only thing I can ask for is your complete and total surrender. So those terms were rejected by Rutledge and Moultrie. At that point, it was a sleepless night waiting for the attack that was going to take place the next morning, and the sun came up and the British were gone. We came that close to history being rewritten. Totally. Because Prevost had heard that Lincoln had gotten the message that Charleston was under siege and was marching, and he was afraid to get caught between two forces. But Marion was there, commanding one of the redoubts. Later, October 1779, Spring Hill Redoubt. The French have gotten there, they have pushed the British, and after they have pushed the British, there is now going to be a siege. And there's a plan, and the plan is going to be attack the British lines, and it's supposed to be a surprise attack. Unfortunately, a sergeant major defected that night, and when he went over, he told them the plan. Now, you see this picture here? If you watch the Ken Burns series, and they talk about Savannah, they show that picture. And when they show that picture, they also tell you that the French forces attacked. And in their white uniforms, they make great targets. And in the ditches around the redoubt, it lay filled with the bodies of those soldiers. Ladies and gentlemen, Spring Hill Redoubt was attacked by the 2nd South Carolina Regiment under Francis Marion. There were not French soldiers in that ditch. There were our soldiers in that ditch. Up on the rampart there, a flag was being planted by Sergeant William Jasper. There were also 2 sets of colors that were issued to the regiment for their gallant defense at Fort Sullivan. Major Bernard Elliott's wife, Eliza, I believe it was, she had made 2 sets of colors for them. One was red and the other was blue. Those colors were being carried. One of the lieutenants was shot down and he fell on top of the colors, and those colors were captured. The other, though he was wounded, Sergeant Jasper, he didn't have the colors there. He got the other colors and stuck them inside his blouse. And he was later evacuated, but he died, mortally wounded. But he saved one of the colors. So when you think about Spring Hill Redoubt and the bravery that had to go, that was Marion commanding regular troops. And then after that, Marion goes and he's learned those hard lessons of war, security, making sure that people can't get out and tell them what you're doing, the value of training, how you work with other people like the French, because the French didn't want to listen to them very well because they were just disorganized Americans. And then as the U.S. forces are falling back towards Charleston, Marion is a location called Sheldon Church. And at Sheldon Church, the correspondence between he and General Moultrie and General Lincoln is a whole month. Marion is basically responsible for the reorganization of the regiments and how that took place. Oh, by the way, and one of the interesting things there, maybe with the influence of the French, Marion writes to somebody that you would be amazed. I have a fabulous set of mustachios. So all the Marion men, including Marion, had grown a mustache. You got to work on that. Marion goes to a party. It is a shut-in party. They lock the doors, booze, women, all that going on. Marion was not about that. That was not his thing. He jumped from a second floor window or balcony to get away. And I'm telling you, I've been a paratrooper. I would not want to jump from the balcony. You can still get that address over on Trad Street. It's still there, pretty tall. Okay? Luckiest broken ankle in history. He is now sent out of Charleston, so he is not there when the 5,500 men have to surrender on the 12th of May. Marion is recuperating. He's walking with a limp. Then afterwards, all these folks, Marion now has just a plethora of experiences based on what he's been through. From the time he was fighting the Cherokee to the time he was in the 2nd South Carolina. He's got experience now with infantry, cavalry, artillery, fortifications, Indian-style guerrilla warfare. He knows now more about security and wishes he'd known more. Mobility due to the horseback, intelligence, what's the enemy doing, when and where and how. And he's got resolve, how to make things happen. Okay? So, the British, after the fall of Charleston, they go and they occupy these areas. And you've got the army up here under Baron Johann de Kalb at that time was trying to reorganize. That's 280 miles from Charleston. Okay, Marion's recovering. He rides and he goes up to Hillsborough to join in. When he gets there, he gets to Cox's Mill sometime in July there, and he's got 20 men. And this is what Otho Holland Williams says about it. And many of you have seen this before. He's talking about Marion showing up, and it does not sound very flattering. I mean, the fact that those small black leather caps, 2nd South Carolina, they thought they looked kind of funny. Men and boys, white and black, all mounted. That was the best part. Miserably equipped, burlesque in appearance. The Continental soldiers laughed at them. Now, Williams goes on to say that the general was glad of the opportunity for detaching Colonel Marion. Well, that is until you look at a letter from General Johann de Kalb, where he is sending Marion to Coles Bridge to gather intelligence and to forage. He actually sends a letter to General Richard Caswell of North Carolina to get to know Marion. Now, one of the things that if you read Weems, you have to kind of go through it and have a pretty good filter to see what's real and what's not. Weems does say, and I think this came from Oree's actual words, that he and Marion had dinner with de Kalb, and de Kalb talked about his experience in Europe. And one of the things that de Kalb did in Europe was he commanded partisan troops. And I think he talked to Marion about the value of mounted warfare, about the value of partisan actions in the enemy's rear areas, where he goes and disrupts communications, movement, and all that sort of thing. And Marion, as much as he wanted to command a disciplined, uniformed, well-prepared unit, took on the role of commanding militia. And he was going to do that like a duck to water, without a doubt. And then they get into South Carolina, and now it's not de Kalb, but Gates. Now Gates has always been the guy that's been criticized that didn't appreciate Marion and that sort of thing. I think that de Kalb appreciated Marion and knew how to use him and his capabilities of his men. Okay, Gates later on gets a request when they get to South Carolina from Major John James of the Kingstree Militia, the Williamsburg Militia, looking for experienced officers. He sends Marion. And ladies and gentlemen, if Marion had not taken command, I'm not sure how this thing would have turned out. Because when he left Rugeley's Mill on August the 15th, the day before the Battle of Camden, if he had been here at Camden, I am not sure that Marion would have survived that battle because he would have been up in it, particularly with Baron DeKalb. He would not have gone away, that's for sure. He hears the first ground sound or the first gunshots of that battle that take place, and he and the men get up and continue to march. They arrive at Witherspoon's Ferry, now Johnsonville, South Carolina. I grew up about 7 miles from there. Okay, and he takes command of these folks, and he may have inspired some folks that had knew him from the 2nd South Carolina, but the other folks, he had to impress. There's Witherspoon's Ferry. It's up a little bit north of Georgetown. And these are the first impressions. Nose was aquiline, meaning he had a hooked nose, chin projected, forehead large, high, eyes black, piercing, 48 years old. His favorite drink was water mixed with vinegar. Must have worked pretty good. In all of his letters, and from 1780 to 1782, I only saw that he was sick once, and that was for about 2 days he had a fever. So pretty good for a guy. Okay? Now, it says here he was dressed in a close round-bodied Trenton jacket. Said he had Liberty Death on there. You know, I don't know. Maybe he got somebody else's helmet. But all of the 2nd South Carolina wore the Liberty. Okay, now, did he dress like this all the time? I don't think so. Life Horse Harry Lee had several things to say about Marion. One was that he was not a pleasing countenance. That he was not of very good manners. Okay, but another thing he said that he dressed only for comfort and decency. So he probably looked pretty much like his other soldiers. 17th of August, he's making things happen. He did not wait for things to develop. Hey, he immediately follows his orders and he goes to burn the boats on the Santee. He moves out and draws fire, as we say. Okay? He's got nothing that he can give these guys. He's got no support, money, ammunition, horses, nothing. The only thing he can do is, I'm offering my leadership to be able to save you and your families for what's happening here in our state. And they believed in him. So Peter Worre goes over to the area around Ladou's Ferry, which is coming down 41 and crossing the Santee River as you're going towards Georgetown. The rest of them go up around the upper Santee. They burn all of these, they're going to burn the boats, to include Peter Worre, inspired the wrath of his uncle, because his uncle said, well, you don't have to burn destroy my boat too. But he did. Okay, that was not a good family reunion later on. Okay, so supposedly a deserter came and told Marion that prisoners, 150 of them, were being marched to Charleston from Camden, and that they're going to stop overnight at Great Savannah. Great Savannah was the abandoned plantation that Thomas Sumter had. Marion commanded about 70 men. He goes in, and oh, by the way, this is August the 25th, 9 days after the terrible defeat at Camden. And Marion goes in, and Hugh Worre is going to secure one part, and then Marion's going to take the other men and come in from the rear. Worre's men run into a sentry. He fires. Everybody rushes in. Okay, the British were inside the house asleep. They had stacked arms outside, away from where they were. Okay, so Worre's men rushed forward, secured their weapons, and 25 of them were killed or wounded, and the others apparently got away. When they asked Major James Weems of the 63rd Regiment what happened, he said, generally speaking, incompetence. Okay, yeah, not everything goes well. Okay, so there were 150 men, actually the later count said 147, and 85 of these men refused to join Marion. They went on to the prison ships in Charleston. they were done with it. Only 3 joined Marion. One of them supposedly the illustrious Sergeant McDonald, that we still don't know his first name, that was braver than brave. And what I will tell you is that after that, Marion became the greatest guerrilla fighter in American history. At this point, Sumter had been hit right after the battle at Fishing Creek, right after the Battle of Camden. Marion was the only organized resistance east of the Wateree River. When, after the Battle of Cowpens, when Greene went up into North Carolina pursuing, and Cornwallis went up to pursue him, Marion was the only resistance east of the Wateree River. So let's think about this. If it was not for Marion and what he did, if the British had been able to secure South Carolina and then move into North Carolina and Virginia, what would the outcome of the war have been? Now, I will get back to questions, but there's something I want to share with you. A guy named George Bancroft wrote the history of the United States in 1840. His last edition was in 1885. Still 79 pages about the Southern campaigns of the American Revolution. Some people have said that he cut back what he said about South Carolina. That's why people don't know about the Southern campaigns. I wanted to investigate and find out if that was true or not. I can't see that he cut back anything. But I did find a quote that is in every edition. He was from Massachusetts, graduated with honors from Harvard at 17 years old in 1817, asked President Polk if he could be ambassador to Prussia, I believe it was. Instead, Polk said, I got another little job for you. How about being the Secretary of the Navy? He was Secretary of the Navy from 1845 to 1846. During that time, he established something called the United States Naval Academy. So I kind of trust his judgment a little bit. And this is his quote talking about South Carolina's role in the American Revolution. Have you ever seen that before? And when people ask why on our license tag now we're saying we're the Revolutionary War was won, we had 1/3 of the casualties of the American Revolution right here in our state. Though many of our actions may not have been huge, those actions kept the British from achieving their Southern strategy. And all these folks are saying that the war ended in Yorktown. Well, it went on here until December 1782. And I'll also tell you that if it was not for the tenacity of the folks here in the back country of South Carolina, we may not be here as Americans today as we see it in Georgia. And we can thank Francis Marion for that.